Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Friday, December 27th, 2024. All right, I hope everybody had a good Christmas. We had a good one over here. Unfortunately, the violence did not stop. Lots of really horrible Gaza stories to start with for today's show. So the first story at the top of antiwar.com today, a U.S.-funded group removes Gaza Famine report. So the Famine Early Warning Systems Network, a project funded by the U.S. Agency for International Development, or USAID, has removed a report from its website that warned it was highly likely famine is occurring in northern Gaza after a complaint by the U.S. ambassador to Israel. So this report, again, this is put together by a group funded by the U.S. government, and this report noted that Israel has imposed a near total blockade of humanitarian and commercial food supplies on the North Gaza Governorate, which includes the cities of Beit Lahia, Beit Hanun, and Jabalia. These cities that for the past few months I've been talking about a lot. These are the cities where they're carrying out this ethnic cleansing campaign. So this report said that 65,000 to 75,000 civilians remained in the area, including civilians who have been unable to or prevented from evacuating. So U.S. Ambassador Jack Lew, this is the U.S. ambassador to Israel, he issued a statement denouncing the report, saying there are far fewer civilians in those areas. And, what he is acknowledging here is that Israel has been conducting this ethnic cleansing campaign. He said that the numbers are inaccurate. I'll read his quote. He said, quote, "The report issued today on Gaza by FuseNet relies on data that is outdated and inaccurate," end quote. So he claimed that there are somewhere between 7,000 and 15,000 civilians in this area of North Gaza. He continued, quote, "At a time when inaccurate information is causing confusion and accusations, it is irresponsible to issue a report like this," end quote. So FuseNet, this is the abbreviation of this Famine Early Warning Systems Network. They said they used UN numbers from mid-November and that they would update the report with the latest figures, but they did not withdraw their assessment that famine was likely occurring in northern Gaza. And last month, so in November, the Integrated Food Security Phase Classification, the IPC, they said that there was a strong likelihood famine was occurring in North Gaza. And they have been completely cut off. These cities have been completely cut off from humanitarian aid or even commercial food deliveries since early October. So it's been almost 3 months now. And it's just, I don't think this got the attention that it deserves. So that's why I made it the top story, because there's like a few layers of things going on here. First, you have a U.S. aid-funded group saying that famine's occurring in North Gaza. And then you have the U.S. ambassador, the U.S. denying the report because they're basically saying, oh no, Israel's cleansed all those people out of this area, even though the State Department is denying that Israel's conducting this ethnic cleansing campaign, this forcible displacement campaign, but this is an acknowledgement of that. And then at the same time, this is also, I think the tactic here was to get them to remove this report, to damage the credibility of the report saying that there's famine occurring in northern Gaza. And then Lew also claimed that the U.S. has worked to ensure more humanitarian access in North Gaza, but that's just a complete joke because virtually no aid has entered northern Gaza. We had that thing from Oxfam the other day. They said only 12 aid trucks have entered these areas since October 6th. So it's a starvation blockade. This is the general's plan, as they call it, an ethnic cleansing campaign, forcing these people to leave, to head south. And under the threat of death, either by shooting, bombing, or starvation. That's what Israel's been conducting here. That's what the U.S. has been supporting. And so, again, here you have the U.S. ambassador to Israel acknowledging that these civilians have been forcibly removed from these areas, and also trying to deny that famine is occurring when, again, it's clear that this is happening. All right, so the next one here. Israeli strikes in Gaza kill 5 journalists and 5 hospital workers. So Israeli attacks in Gaza on Thursday included a strike on a vehicle that killed 5 journalists and strikes near the Kamal Adwan hospital in northern Gaza, which killed at least 5 medical workers. So early Thursday morning, an Israeli strike hit a vehicle clearly marked press that killed 5 journalists for the TV channel Al-Quds Today. According to Gaza's government media office, the slaughter brings the total number of Palestinian journalists killed by Israel since October 2023 to 201. So they've killed more than 200 journalists in Gaza. And you see this picture here. This is from Reuters of this vehicle. You could still see it even as it's on fire and been destroyed, that it says press on the back. And the press vehicle was hit near the gates of the Al-Awda hospital in Nuseirat, central Gaza. According to Al Jazeera, one of the journalists who was killed, his wife was in the hospital giving birth. She was in labor, giving birth to their first child. And the Israeli security agency Shin Bet acknowledged the strike and claimed that it targeted Palestinian Islamic Jihad militants who were masquerading as journalists, but they offered no evidence to back up this claim. So that's just the strike that killed 5 journalists. Now, the strikes near the Kamal Adwan hospital were devastating. According to Drop Site News, 3 medical workers were killed in a strike on a residential building near the Kamal Adwan hospital. A total of 50 Palestinians are believed to have been killed in the strike. Dr. Hussam Abu Safia, director of Kamal Adwan Hospital, said, quote, "There are approximately 50 martyrs, including 3 of our medical staff, under the rubble of a building opposite Kamal Adwan Hospital after an airstrike by the occupying forces," end quote. So the dead medical workers included a pediatrician, a lab specialist, and a maintenance technician. 2 paramedics were killed in separate strikes near the hospital. So those are the 5 medical workers killed around the hospital, 5 journalists also killed, and a whole bunch of other people killed as well. Just relentless bombing every day. This slaughter continues. And the health ministry said in their daily update, which they put out about midday Gaza time, that at least 38 Palestinians were killed and 137 were wounded in the previous 24 hours. And the health ministry's numbers don't include the people missing under the rubble. So they're saying, the director of the hospital was saying that they're under the rubble. About approximately 50 people are under the rubble. So they weren't counted in this health ministry update. And I think this strike happened after they put it out anyway. But, it goes to show how many people are probably not being counted in these daily updates in the overall death toll that the health ministry puts out. All right, so the next one here, 4 babies die from hypothermia in Gaza. So this article's from CNN. A newborn baby died from the cold in a tent encampment in Al-Mawasi in southern Gaza, a health official said Wednesday, highlighting the stark challenges to survival faced by Palestinian children displaced by Israeli forces. All these people that have been living in tents, some of them have been living in tents for over a year now. I mean, imagine that. Imagine having kids and babies and having to live in a tent. So Salah Mahmoud Al-Fiza, a doctor... Sorry, I just completely mixed that up. Salah Mahmoud Al-Fissa was the baby who died. And Dr. Munir Al-Bush said that the baby froze to death from the extreme cold. In the past week, at least 4 infants have died of hypothermia from low temperatures and a lack of access to warmth while living in tents, according to the head of pediatrics at the Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis. Among them were a 3-day-old and a 1-month-old who also died in Al-Mawasi. This is the so-called safe zone that people, they still get bombed being in this so-called safe zone. And, just the level of things that they're dealing with here. Staff in the neonatal ICU see at least 5 cases of hypothermia per day. Reduced breastfeeding and limited availability of infant formula has severely compounded the risk of hypothermia among babies. Meanwhile, health workers are struggling to treat young patients due to shortages of electricity, diesel, and other fuel. So just absolutely horrific that you have these babies dying of these, as the temperatures are dropping. All right, so the next one here, Israel builds a beachside resort in Gaza for IDF soldiers. So the Israeli military has built a beachside resort on the coast of the northern Gaza Strip, where IDF soldiers occupying the Palestinian territory can relax and take a break from waging a genocidal war. So according to the Israeli news site Ynet, the retreat, as they called it, was built alongside a water desalination plant that provides 60,000 liters of drinking water per day. At the resort, IDF soldiers can enjoy a cafe, hotel-style meals, massages, and hot showers, and they have access to mental health support and medical services. And yes, this is a picture of an IDF soldier using a cotton candy machine, making cotton candy at this beachside resort. And this is what the Ynet Israeli media called this, a beachside resort. So the chief warrant officer, the head of the food services for the IDF Southern Command, told Ynet, quote, "You know this is Gaza, right? Yet we've created a sense of home here with iced coffee, espresso, protein shakes, toast, shakshuka, fresh fruit, and even ice cream on warmer days," end quote. So in one part of Gaza, in most of Gaza, you have these families living in tents, babies dying of hypothermia, people being bombed in their tents, journalists, doctors being killed. And then in another part, you have the soldiers that are committing those atrocities, hanging out, making cotton candy, getting iced coffee. And then the Ynet report said that the IDF has built similar refreshment centers elsewhere in Gaza, but they don't match the scope and quality of this one. The construction of such facilities is just the latest sign that Israel is planning for a long-term military occupation of Gaza and is not interested in a hostage deal with Hamas that would lead to a permanent ceasefire. Colonel Michael Azulai, a logistics officer for the Southern Command, said, quote, "The facility's deployment reflects our readiness for prolonged operations, even if a ceasefire is reached in the context of a hostage exchange," end quote. So he's saying, even if there's a ceasefire, we're here. We're here for the long term. And then I mentioned in the article all the places like the Netzarim corridor, where they've demolished all the buildings and established military bases. They've also done that in the Philadelphia corridor, along the entire border, Israel-Gaza border, which they call the buffer zone. And then the ethnic cleansing campaign, they're going to do similar things in those northern areas. And of course, this is all going to lead eventually to the establishment of Jewish settlements in Gaza. That is clearly the game plan here. And I mean, just the contrast between what these Israeli soldiers are doing at this resort and what the Palestinians are facing. Just absolutely shameful that the U.S. government is supporting this, funding and enabling all of this. All right, so the next one here, Israel loosened rules to bomb Hamas, killing many more civilians. So this is an article from the New York Times, and this is essentially something we've known for more than a year now. This report says how after October 7th, like the same day, the Israeli, there's more details of this, but they're saying the Israeli military leadership, loosened the rules of engagement when it comes to bombing Gaza, allowing for up to 20 civilians to be killed, to kill a lower level Hamas member. 972 magazine, which is an Israeli publication, they revealed this, not exactly the specifics, but in November 2023, November 30th, 2023, they published this report that had all these details about them loosening restrictions and targeting what they call power targets, which are residential buildings, civilian targets. So there's more details in this report from the New York Times about that. And it mentions, as we've seen when it comes to the higher level Hamas guys, that they've ordered strikes that kill hundreds of civilians to kill one guy. So this gets into all that. Again, this is something we've known for more than a year. And the New York Times, they did a lot of interviews and again, more details. This is information. It really is kind of amazing how stuff that's reported by Israeli media regularly, like the stuff from Haaretz that I've been going over lately about them killing civilians and counting them as terrorists, or just them Israeli media calling what's happening in North Gaza ethnic cleansing. And you don't see stuff like that from the New York Times or the Washington Post. So here we have, more than a year later, them essentially reporting what 972 reported just a month into this thing. So, but I would say, go give this a read if you have the time, see more details about these strikes. All right, so the next one here is Israeli airstrikes hit Yemen, killing at least 4. So on Thursday, Israeli warplanes carried out another round of airstrikes against Yemen, targeting the capital Sana'a and several ports, killing at least 4 people. The Israeli attacks on the Yemeni capital included strikes on the Sana'a International Airport, which killed 3 people and injured 16 others. And the head of the World Health Organization, Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, he has a long name, Ghebreyesus is his last name, he was at the airport, and apparently he was very close to where these Israeli strikes hit. He said, quote, "One of our plane's crew members was injured. The air traffic control tower, the departure lounge, just a few meters from where we were, and the runways were damaged. We will need to wait for the damage to the airport to be repaired before we can leave," end quote. So he was at the airport. Him and some other UN and WHO staff were waiting to board a plane when these strikes hit. And then on the western coast of Yemen, Israeli strikes hit a power station in Hodeidah and targeted the ports of Salif and Ras Izzah, similar targets that they hit in the last round. And at least 1 person was killed in Hodeidah and 3 people are missing. So the Israeli military claimed that it hit military infrastructure used by the Houthis and also acknowledged targeting energy infrastructure. The IDF said in a statement, quote, "The targets that were struck by the IDF include military infrastructure used by the Houthi terrorist regime for its military activities in both the Sana'a International Airport and the Hejaz and Ras Kanatib power stations," end quote. So the attack marked the second round of Israeli strikes in Yemen within a week. Strikes launched last Thursday hit similar targets and killed at least 9 people. So the Houthis, they're saying they're not going to back down. They're vowing a response. This Israeli attack comes as Houthi attacks, missiles, and drone attacks on Israel have become more successful. We're seeing them become more capable of striking Israel despite these Israeli airstrikes and this nearly year-long U.S. bombing campaign against them. As I predicted, this bombing the Houthis is just going to escalate the situation. And it's just continuing to escalate more and more. Now this is, the second round of pretty heavy Israeli airstrikes on Yemen within a week. I know in Israel, everybody's saying, that they're going to ramp things up even more. But Yemen is far from Israel. So all Israel could really do is launch airstrikes. And the Houthis have been very resilient against airstrikes, against Saudi airstrikes, and against U.S. airstrikes. And I'm sure they can handle these Israeli airstrikes as well. All right, so the next one here, Israeli army moves deeper into southern Lebanon. This article is from Jason Ditz. So Thursday marked the 30-day mark in the 60-day ceasefire, so-called ceasefire, I should say, between Lebanon and Israel, because there was never really a cessation of military operations by Israel. And that's getting even more obvious now as Israel is openly talking about staying in Lebanon past the 60-day deadline for a withdrawal. And Israel is pushing the offensive deeper into southern Lebanon. They seized the town of Wadi al-Hujr, and they fired off rounds of machine gun fire as they advanced, forcing the civilian population to flee once again. And so this area is deeper than any other area that they've been in since the invasion. And again, it just goes to show that Israel has just been acting with total impunity. They've continued to launch airstrikes in Lebanon, and now they're actually taking more territory, and there's been no response from the U.S., which is supposedly supposed to oversee the ceasefire, but obviously they lean very heavily, in favor of one side of the ceasefire, and the U.S. gave Israel a letter of assurances that they would be able to act in Lebanon if they deemed that the ceasefire was being violated. So that gives Israel an incredible amount of room to, an incredible amount of freedom of action, and we see them use that freedom quite a bit. All right, so the next one here, Israeli forces fire on Syrians near the Golan Heights, injuring 5. So this article is from the New Arab. This is from, so this happened on, oh wait, sorry, I'm getting myself mixed up here. Oh, this is from Wednesday, so this was Christmas Day. Israeli forces fired on Syrian protesters in the villages of Suwaisa and Waya al-Kabira in the Quneitra province near the occupied Golan Heights on Wednesday morning, injuring 5 people. Israeli forces stormed the village of Suwaisa using tanks and 2 bulldozers, demolishing a number of deserted military barracks in the center of the village and its outskirts, while also felling trees. While the Israeli troops did not demolish homes, residents gathered to protest against their destructive acts, raising Syrian independence flags. Israeli forces then fired in the air and directly at the protesters, injuring 3. And the protests apparently continued and eventually the Israeli forces left. But we're seeing, this occupation of Syria, another thing that is not going to end anytime soon, and Netanyahu has ordered them to stay until at least the end of 2025. All right, so the next one here, the U.S. launches an airstrike in Somalia, 2 killed. So this has not happened in a little while as far as I am aware. U.S. Africa Command said in a press release on Thursday that its forces launched an airstrike in Somalia on December 24th. AFRICOM claimed that according to its initial assessment of the strike, 2 al-Shabaab fighters were killed and no civilians were harmed, although the Pentagon is notorious for undercounting civilian casualties in Somalia, where there's barely any scrutiny of their action. The command said that the strike was launched 10 kilometers southwest of the town of Koino Barrow, which is in the southern Middle Juba region. The bombing comes after a lull of U.S. airstrikes in Somalia. The last U.S. strike claimed by AFRICOM in Somalia occurred on July 15th. It's possible that the U.S. has launched other airstrikes that it didn't announce. The CIA, sometimes does drone strikes in Somalia. But as far as we know, publicly know, this is the first U.S. airstrike in Somalia since July 15th. The U.S. strike comes a few weeks after Jubaland, which is the southern federal member state of Somalia. Somalia is made up of several federal states within the borders, and the government that the U.S. backs that's based in Mogadishu does not control much of, if you look at Somalia, they don't control much of that territory within those borders. Of course, in the north, you have Somaliland, which is a de facto independent country. There's talk that the Trump administration might recognize Somaliland's independence, and the reason they would do that is to establish some sort of U.S. military base up there. But now there's a split with Jubaland, which is, the southern federal member state. They suspended relations with the U.S.-backed government after the government rejected the Jubaland election results. And those tensions over the elections led to armed clashes between federal troops and local Jubaland forces. And on Monday, clashes broke out again in a town near the Ethiopian border. And apparently Ethiopian troops intervened on the side of the Jubaland forces, on the side of the local forces, against the federal government, against the U.S.-backed government. So tensions are very high right now between Somalia and Ethiopia over this region. And al-Shabaab is expected to exploit the destabilization of Jubaland. So the whole thing's kind of a mess that the U.S. is involved in, and I suspect that these strikes are them, saying, okay, there's some disorder down there. There's this destabilization in this area. Let's start hitting al-Shabaab again there. so they don't take too much advantage of it. And the U.S. military, they claim that al-Shabaab is a threat to the United States. They do that, they point to its size. It is relatively big, and it is affiliated with Al-Qaeda, but it's widely believed that the group does not have any ambitions outside of Somalia. And if you look at their history, they're not waging a global jihad. They're focused on Somalia. They were born out of a U.S.-backed Ethiopian invasion of Somalia in 2006. That toppled the Islamic Courts Union, which was a coalition of Muslim groups who briefly held power in Mogadishu after ousting CIA-backed warlords. So they took power, but then quickly the U.S. backed this Ethiopian invasion, and then the al-Shabaab was the more extremist elements of the Islamic Courts Union, the kind of radical offshoot. And their first recorded attack was in 2007 against Ethiopian troops occupying Mogadishu. And then it wasn't until 2012 that they declared loyalty to Al-Qaeda after years of fighting the U.S. and its proxies. So it's not like, this idea that they're some kind of global group is just not true. And any kind of Somalia expert will say that, will tell you that. They don't have ambitions outside of Somalia. So it's just another conflict that the U.S. is involved in that we should not be involved in this. All right, so the next one here, Biden orders surge of weapons to Ukraine. So this article is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. Russia launched a major missile and drone barrage targeting Ukrainian energy infrastructure. And the attack came after the Ukrainian drones hitting a residential building deep inside Russia that I covered. So Biden said that he was outraged by the Russian attack and ordered the Pentagon to continue to surge weapons to Ukraine. So this was on Wednesday that Russia fired an estimated 170 drones and missiles at Ukrainian energy infrastructure, causing several deaths and widespread damage and power outages. Biden said, quote, "The purpose of this outrageous attack was to cut off the Ukrainian people's access to heat and electricity during winter and to jeopardize the safety of its grid," end quote. So Biden says because of this, more stuff is coming. So this is what he said exactly. He said, quote, "In recent months, the United States has provided Ukraine with hundreds of air defense missiles and more are on the way. I have directed the Department of Defense to continue its surge of weapons deliveries to Ukraine, and the United States will continue to work tirelessly to strengthen Ukraine's position in its defense against Russian forces," end quote. So I bet we'll see some more weapon shipments in the coming weeks. Trump's inauguration is coming, not too far away now, about 24 days now until Trump is inaugurated. We'll see how many weapons they can dump into Ukraine between now and then. All right, so the next one here, HTS names UN designated terrorist as intel chief. This article is from The Cradle. So on December 26th, Syria's de facto authorities appointed former Al-Qaeda commander and Nusra Front co-founder Anas Hassan Khattab as the head of the country's General Intelligence Agency. Khattab, also known as Abu Ahmed Hudud, was blacklisted as a terrorist by the UN Security Council in September 2014 for his close association with Al-Qaeda. According to the listing, for several years, he was involved in the financing, planning, facilitating, preparing, or perpetrating. Sorry, I'm really struggling reading today for some reason. So he was implicated in all these acts on behalf of the Nusra Front, which was Al-Qaeda in Syria, and which rebranded to Hayat Tahrir al-Sham in 2017. So Khattab served as the administrative emir of the Nusra Front as early as 2014, but was part of the Shura Council by mid-2013. He was also tasked with selecting personal bodyguards for HTS leader and Syria's de facto ruler, Abu Muhammad al-Julani, who dropped that name and now goes by his real name, Ahmad al-Shara. So in recent years, Khattab oversaw general security operations in Idlib. His involvement in intelligence gathering dates back to the period when HTS consolidated control over northern Syria with Turkish support. During this time, he managed surveillance of covert networks along the borders of HTS areas, and he was in Al-Qaeda in Iraq. And Jilani fought for Al-Qaeda in Iraq as well after the U.S. invasion. All right, so that is it for the news for today. Please go check out our viewpoints. One from Ramsey Baroud. The world owes Palestine this much. Please stop censoring Palestinian voices. One from Thomas Knapp. A man, a bad plan, a canal, and Panama. So about Trump's call for the U.S. to retake the Panama Canal. One from Dan Grazer. Flop. F-35 proponents can't tell you that it works. One from Nuvpret Kalra and Tim Biondo. OpenAI is using its technology to kill. And our spotlight from Bruce Fine. TikTok ban sacrifices free speech in the name of national security. So please go check all of that out. Go down to our Gaza section. We have a lot of stories about Christmas in Gaza, how the Christians were celebrating. And, obviously very somber for them, but they did have Christmas Mass and everything. One thing I forget, that Christians in Gaza used to, a lot of them would go to the West Bank, would go to Bethlehem for Christmas. But obviously they didn't do that last year. And over the years, Israel was approving less and less travel permits to allow the Christians to go celebrate in Bethlehem. So again, we have a lot of stories about that in the lower section. That is it from me for today. And you could always support this show by sharing it. Tell your friends about antiwar.com. Follow us on social media, on Instagram, X. I never know if I should say X or Twitter. Whichever you prefer, follow us over there. Also follow antiwar.com on TikTok. We're doing pretty good over there. We almost have 1,000 followers already. It's basically just clips of this show that we post. I think that's it. So this is it for the week. It's the weekend again for me. So I'll be back in a couple days. Thanks for listening.